application in Michigan. I want to start off by saying a quick apology. We had some technical difficulties. We're about 20 minutes late on this. For those of you who are listening on the webinar, there are a lot of you. You feel free to reach out to me, and I will give you a copy of this. It'll be available on our YouTube channel. We'll make it happen for you. And then I want to welcome everybody for joining us on Facebook Live as well. So welcome everyone, and we will get started. So what we're going to learn today, we are going to do an overview of the Michigan marijuana program, and then we're going to talk about how to write a winning application in the state of Michigan, and we're going to talk about the narratives that you need on that as well. I'm your host, Sean Eubanks, Vice President of Business Development for STRAINWISE Consulting. A couple of housekeeping notes. First and foremost, questions are welcome, guys. We hope to have time for Q&A at the end of this. There's a lot of content that I want to go through, well over 100 slides, but we hope to have time for Q&A. For those of you on Facebook Live, if you have a question for us specifically about the Michigan medical marijuana program, feel free to chime in. We'll check that, and I'm happy to answer your questions live. As usual, people tuning in on the webinar, you can submit your questions to the portal here, and I'll get to those as well. All right, there are multiple ways to download copies of this. You can rewatch it anytime by recording the link that you signed up for, so it's the same link there. If not, shoot me an email at subanks@STRAINWISE Consulting, and I will get you a copy of this. And then you can visit our STRAINWISE Consulting Facebook page, of course, and then YouTube as well for recording of this webinar. All right, and if you guys, anybody would like to sponsor these webinars, please contact me as well. We boost on Facebook Live. You can see those numbers and see the metrics there. Very impressive, and we're very active doing that and making sure that this message gets out. So if you're interested in being a sponsor, contact me. We'll talk about that. I want to remind you that STRAINWISE Consulting podcast, bluntbusinessradio.com, is every Wednesday. We have an outstanding number of guests. Everything is booked up for the rest of the year. But if you're interested in being on this podcast with me, you want to talk about cannabis business and things that you think that are valuable to our customer base and something that you want to get the word out, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll connect you with our production team there. Our sponsor is STRAINWISE Consulting. They are the most sought-after consulting company for applications and management contracts in the industry. They consulted on the very first recreational license in the world. Nearly 100% success rate on all applications submitted. We've submitted more than 200 of those applications. We have 9 branded dispensaries throughout the state of Colorado. We're expanding in multiple states and territories, including Puerto Rico, all the way across the country to California. So look out for that. We also have more than 100,000 square feet of cultivation space here in Colorado. And of course, we're among the top 5 marijuana companies in Colorado. We're consultant to the very first recreational license, consultant to the very first vertically integrated Native American tribe selling cannabis in the United States. All right, guys, so without further ado, we will get started here on how to write a winning cannabis application in the state of Michigan. All right, so a quick overview of the program and important notes to understand this. Michigan chooses to use the archaic spelling of marijuana, M-A-R-I-H-U-A-N-A. This is more than just symbolism. I'm going to kind of touch on this a lot. The DEA uses this spelling, as does the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which was the original instrument of prohibition and written by Harry Anslinger himself. So I'll give you some context there. This isn't just trivia. I think this gives us insight into how they view the plant. Michigan is going to be a very tough state, a very conservative state, and I just want to kind of provide the framework for that. Michigan's legalizing while also kind of looking down their nose at patients and caregivers for a myriad of reasons. Governor Snyder appointed 5 people to the Medical Marijuana Licensing Board. There's a pharmacist, there are 2 politicians, a former police sergeant, and the retired director of public policy at GM. None of them has an ounce of medical marijuana experience that could be relevant. So, and this is pretty typical, fair enough. Every state, I mean, we haven't had a single board that was put together where someone had definitive experience in the medical marijuana industry. That's okay. I also want to make a note, and we'll talk about this further, Michigan has very strict rules about criminal histories. All right, so in order to be eligible for a grower license, the applicant and each investor must not have an interest in a secure transporter or safety compliance facility. Transporter is a type of license. Safety compliance facility is also a type of license, just spelling out that you can't have an interest in those. They must also have as an employee an individual who has a minimum of 2 years experience as a registered primary caregiver. but is not currently a registered primary caregiver. So the caregiver has given their caregiver rights to become an employee of yours. Not that big of a deal, just a simple technicality we want to make note of. Municipalities are going to be very important. They are very important across the country. A lot of people are focused on what the state is asking you to do, and in reality, municipalities have a lot of power, and we'll kind of talk about that a little later. The applicant, if an individual, is eligible if he or she has been a resident of the state of Michigan for less than a continuous 2-year period immediately preceding the date of filing an application. The applicant must not be convicted of any of the following. A felony under the laws of the state or any other state. This is interesting. You cannot have a felony in any state, any other state in the United States within the past 10 years, or be convicted of a controlled substance-related felony within the past 10 years, any state. The applicant is ineligible if he or she has been convicted of a misdemeanor involving a controlled substance, theft, dishonesty, or fraud in any state within the past 5 years. Dishonesty, interesting. All right, the applicant is ineligible if he or she has been found responsible for violating a local ordinance in any state involving a controlled substance. Dishonesty, theft, or fraud, of course, is there. Michigan values moral character more highly than any other state I've ever seen. The following things will probably be taken into consideration in the application. Let's see. The integrity of moral character and reputation, personal and business profitability, financial ability and experience, and responsibility or means to operate or maintain a marijuana facility of the applicant or any person either. The financial ability of the applicant to purchase and maintain adequate liability and casualty insurance, the sources and total amount of the applicant's capitalization to operate and maintain the proposed marijuana facility. If you're reading so far and you're listening here, please don't panic. You can achieve what they're asking for through partnership. We can advise you on that. In most cases, we're taking a very, very strong candidate, someone who has no doubt has strengths, but a lot of times we're filling out their board for them. We'll list ourselves as the operator for them. It will signify to the state that you guys had the foresight to hire a consulting company that's an experienced operator. Those things really fill out your team. We can bring in investors as well. You got residency requirements. This is a sort of it takes a village approach. So don't panic here if you're listening to this for the first time and you're thinking, I don't have all of those things. Rarely does one person meet all of the requirements. All right, and then they're going to be looking at whether the applicant has filed or had filed against in a proceeding for bankruptcy in the past 7 years. Think sort of, government loans here, basic, bankruptcies, foreclosures, things like that. Michigan is taken a little bit of the federal oversight from probably the Federal Housing Authority and then sort of matched it into, further marijuana laws and restrictions ordinances here. So whether the applicant has a history of non-compliance is also important with any regulatory requirements in the state. They want you to be clean in your background, have no issues there. We have a president in office who's famously a very successful businessman, but also has filed bankruptcy a couple of times, maybe 4. So in this instance, it sounds like he wouldn't be eligible to have a marijuana facility. So anyway, also you want to be clear of any, you can't be a defendant in litigation involving any of its business practices or anything like that. Okay, so going over this overview with you guys, we have about 50 minutes left, and I'm going to do as much of this as I possibly can. I'm going to be speaking fast. Again, I want to invite you guys on Facebook Live, ask any questions, and I've got questions coming in here that I'll answer as well if we have time. All right, so the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, which is LARA, the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation, BMMR, is responsible for the oversight of the medical marijuana program in Michigan. So what is the size and scope of each application? Number one, you have pre-qualification, okay? During the pre-qualification, applicants and affiliates will be fingerprinted. This is standard. And will undergo a full background investigation, also standard. Pre-qualification will also require the following forms and documents. Completed application and fees, of course. Now, the application, that's a quick line there. The application is going to have between 20 to 25 narratives, a lot of things going on with that. We'll touch on those narratives and what's entailed in them, but understand just having that complete and filled out like they asked you. All right, you'll need a government-issued ID with all persons of ownership interest. That's normal. Just a quick word here on ownership interest. Make sure that if you've got someone who's an investor and they're going to have an ownership interest, that just prepare them to have a full background check. If someone's saying, look, I don't want to disclose anything, and this isn't necessarily speaking to their criminal background, which is just is rare, frankly, to have someone with a criminal background to do this, even though you've got a history in the black market possibly. But this really speaks to their financial wherewithal and them providing information that's necessary for the application. Where this can be an issue at times is when they have other successful businesses. We have this happen multiple times where they're like, look, I have 1,500 John Deere locations across the country, and I don't want a marijuana program associated with that. So they're more trying to be discreet about it, but it is they have to disclose that. We actually had one of the few applications that we didn't have success on was in Hawaii with a very famous applicant, and they didn't want to provide this background financial information. We really don't quite know why, whether they were focused on maybe they had submitted different documents to someone else and they just didn't want it to line up, or maybe they were a little bit self-conscious about their net worth, which was impressive nonetheless. But anyway, just watch out for that. Understand investors need to fully disclose what they've got going on. Next up, you'll notarize these, of course. You have entity information, including bylaws, articles of incorporation, and other forms. We do this as a part of our application process. Our general counsel in-house handles things. I'm kind of amazed at people who have questions about this. This is very, very easy to do. You can go get it done with the Secretary of State. You can pull bylaws and things like that, or you can simply pay an attorney to do it the right way first and sort of make it bulletproof as much as possible. Ownership interest disclosures, we talked about that. We talked about fingerprinting already, we covered that. Ownership interest disclosures, financial forms including debt, bankruptcy, tax compliance, tax returns, CPA attested active bank financial statements. We had a client in a state of Ohio who is won and is on their way to opening up a great facility. One of the things that threw us for a loop during that process was they just weren't current on their taxes, and it made sense and it made business sense, and I personally totally understand that. Some businesses that you run, you want to delay the filing, and sometimes you can get behind a year. You're behind, but you're filing notices and things like that, so you're in compliance, but you want to make sure that those have been filed. So if you haven't filed your taxes and you're behind in those, please disclose that up front to the person writing the application for you. It's very, very important. All right, regulation documents are next. Very straightforward there. Criminal history disclosure, litigation disclosure. All right, then after we finish that first step, you have step 2, which is license qualification. License qualification will require the following forms and documents. Municipalities authorizing ordinance resolution and approval notice, pretty straightforward. Business specifications, including security, technology, marketing, deed or lease agreement, and more. You'll need proof of financial responsibility via an insurance policy, bond, or security. Very straightforward. Sometimes this isn't really well defined and it's left up to interpretation. Sometimes you'll be asked to place a bond up front. Sometimes you'll be just noticed, listen, if you win the application, you win the license, you'll need to post that bond immediately and have all that happen. So, whether that's typically not an issue with bond. Cash on hand is liquid assets. It's typically something that comes up over and over and again as a surprise. We prepare our clients for it. If you're writing the application on your own, make sure that you're mindful of what's due. In all fairness, investors, and most of our clients have investors or they're investors themselves, they need to know, hey, what is my total capital outlay? And if you're missing a $250,000 cash on hand deposit that's necessary, and even worse, if it needs to be seasoned, which often it does, that your investors are not going to be happy to hear that. So prepare for that. Also, the terms on that type of loan they kind of mimic a hard money loan, and then you have sort of a marijuana premium on top of that. So very unfriendly terms. You don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're having to borrow cash. Just simply to qualify for the application. All right, you'll have an employee staffing plan, the number of plans. Training and hiring information is a big deal. We give our clients, when we write the application, we write standard operating procedures. We've developed our own. We've been in business since 2009, and we simply carry these over, but there is an absolute custom element to that. Unfortunately, it's not a situation where you can just pull SOPs and just copy and paste them. the SOPs are going to carry over into your actual business operations. One of the things we do really well is when we're writing an application, we're indicating for our clients, this is how you're going to run your business. So it's more than just a concept or an ideology, a theory. It is operations 101. So very important, but you're at least going to need an employee staffing plan. Red flags here would be if you don't know how staffing works and how many people you're going to need and you miss that number. You just don't want to stand out when the regulators are reading this and go, oh my gosh, they're a lot lower than this person, or wow, they're way overemployed, right? You just want to kind of fall in an appropriate manner. And again, the name of the game is just telling people that you know how to operate, you know what you're doing. So if you don't, you hire an operator, you hire a consultant that can fill this out for you and advise you on it. Just imagine you having 5 or 6 extra employees that you didn't need, and you're trying to do this on your own. You simply paid way more than the consultant borrowed. And in most instances like us, the consultant's not taking equity, and we're profit sharing with you. So our success is your success. We don't make money unless you do. So we're a percentage of profit versus just a hard cost or a top line, something off the top line. All right, acknowledgement and consent to investigation, statute, and rule compliance. They're just asking you if that's okay. Of course it is. All right, so how many licenses will be granted for cultivation, processing, and retail? Anything on Facebook Live? Okay. The department and the board cannot limit the number of licenses issued. Okay, the number of licenses issued will be based on the local municipality. Local municipalities may limit the type and number of facilities authorized within its boundaries. So the 5 types of licenses. Okay, I hope everyone's clear on that. This is pretty straightforward. Local municipality will say, all right, we're gonna allow 2 dispensaries and 5 grows, right? This is how it starts. It develops that. Keep in mind, in a mature market in Colorado where we are, we have 1,800 cultivators. That's a lot. Okay, and Michigan's going to be 3x the size and scope of Colorado, right? A lot more people, bigger market. So ultimately, you're going to have a lot. But understand in the very beginning, this is very common. Municipalities don't know cannabis, are not familiar with it, and they'll aim to. You're going to get more nays in there, and so they're going to aim to structure that program and limit it. That's pretty common. So, and then of course they can make those changes. It is typical for municipalities to come out, at least 50% of them, and say, nope, flat out, no, we're not doing a program. No big deal. Their neighboring municipality, they see this economic boom happening, tax revenue coming in. A lot of times the municipalities can even share in profit, and it just becomes it's just an obvious economic boom that they want to participate in. So even though they're saying no up front, it doesn't mean no forever. All right, there are 5 types of licenses: grower, processor, transporter, provisioning center. In your state of Michigan, it is unique to call them provisioning centers. The rest of the country calls those dispensaries. No big deal. Safety compliance facility, unique. It's like a laboratory, but it's broader. They're gonna, you'll see a distribution model in some states where the distributors will handle testing. We've got some examples of distribution models that have failed and run into hiccups. Nevada comes to mind of that. California's dealing with one right now where they're not quite sure how to handle the excise tax. And I have the California czar coming on to the podcast, bluntbusinessradio.com. I'm really excited about that because I heard her speak in Los Angeles, just really great person, and I'm looking forward to talking to her and asking her questions about how that program develops. But anyway, safety compliance facility, they're actually going to test money too, which is funny. So very interesting deal there. All right, so continuing on to how many licenses are granted. The department and board cannot limit the number of licenses issued. The number of licenses will be based on that. So in addition to grower, processor, transporter, right? Now, I don't want you to confuse transporter with delivery, guys. Transporter is transporting from the cultivator to the provisioning center, which again, transporter is transporting from the cultivator to the provisioning center, which again is the dispensary, and through the safety compliance as well. You're simply transporting. You're not delivering to the customer, the end user. All right. For growers, guys, there are 3 classes of grower licenses. Class A is 500 plants. Class B is 1,000 plants, and Class C is 1,500 plants. All right. So the cost of all the fees from the state to apply for all types of applications. All right, so Section 4015 of the Medical Marijuana Facilities License Act requires that setting of application fee amounts for each category and class of license by rule, in addition to fees associated with the state license. A municipality may require a non-refundable fee up to $5,000 to operate within its boundaries. Very cool that they set that cap. That's really good. You want to know. A lot of times, in some instances in Michigan, there are things that we don't know yet. But a lot of times they'll kind of leave that open. The municipality will start to create their own fees, and as you might imagine, they're higher than that. So the state license application fee. So the state application fee, right? You have municipalities, you're going to be capped at $5,000 for that fee. State license application fee is non-refundable and offsets the costs for the Michigan State Police and contract costs for investigation services, conducting background investigation and all those things. There's a non-refundable application fee with the state. It must be submitted before an application will be processed. It will be likely between $4,000 and $8,000 range. Now, there are, in addition to this, our fees in Michigan are typically $40,000 to write an application for you. There are people out there right now that are doing these licenses for around $10,000. You can seek those out. The difference in that is you want to make sure that they're not submitting a cookie cutter cut and paste application. Some of these guys are doing 25, 30 different application submissions in the same city, and effectively they're taking all these clients in. It's lucrative. That's their business model. I completely respect that. But the question you have to ask is how is my application going to be different? If you're turning in 25 applications, you're not giving me exclusivity, number one. Exclusivity is important. We give our clients exclusivity because we don't want to write a competing application against you in the same city. We don't feel like that's fair and right and honest. We're allowed to do that, and we're able to be successful because we're not focused simply on the application. We have to write the application for you. Our technical writers on staff are the best I've seen in the industry, and I've been all over this country speaking and attending events and meeting and networking. I can assure you if there was anyone out there that wrote them better than we did, we'd have them on our staff. But the idea there is we're not making our money on the application. We have a vested interest in doing operations and consulting and compliance down the road for you. So we want to get you in and doing that, but we want to make, it's not a cookie cutter thing that we can just rubber stamp and send in there. Any event, you're looking at probably around $50,000 to write the application with the state fees and all that to submit to the state and the municipality there. So remember, this is an estimation, merely an advisory, not our estimation, our cost, but the state here saying it's just merely an advisory, maybe subject to further review. Here's a hint, these costs go up over time. Invariably, the demand will exceed what is available, the production, and Michigan will be scrambling, municipalities will be scrambling to open up facilities, allow more licenses. There'll be a second wave that's pretty common, and those fees will be much higher. All right, you will do an annual regulatory assessment. The regulatory assessment is due prior to the issuance of each license and may vary depending on the number of licenses anticipated to be issued. The regulatory assessment does not apply to safety compliance facilities. Safety compliance facilities, we'll kind of talk about that in a minute as well. They're really they're making it really cheap to get that license and to do that, and the restrictions are very low. They're pretty serious about these safety compliance facilities. Just as a side note, if you're interested in getting that part of the business, we could talk about that for sure. All right, this assessment offsets operational costs and other statutory mandates, including Laura's costs to implement the act. It also offsets the cost of medical marijuana related services, including Attorney General's office, department. By statute, the assessment must also provide around $500,000 annually. That's $500,000 collectively, which is met there. This $500,000 that they're asking to cover these costs is not bad. We've seen that go up in the millions of dollars. We've seen estimations that are just mind-boggling. So not bad there, and no big deal. And just want to let you know the $500,000 isn't something you're responsible for. It's the industry as a whole. All right, so Laura is currently determining the annual regulatory assessment for the fiscal year of 2018 for each of the 5 license categories authorized by the MMFLA. Grower A licenses are capped by statute at $10,000 as the fee. Grower B and C, processor, transporter, and provisioning centers will be dependent on the number of total licenses subject to the assessment. And this is interesting. We can dive into the cost of this a little further if we have time, but just know they could be as low as $10,000 and as high as $57,000. And that may sound crazy and it may sound high, but I can tell you there are municipalities in the state of California that are in the $30,000 range, just non-refundable requests to do an application. That, of course, California is in its own world. Is going to lead the country and lead the world in cannabis, most likely production and sales for sure. So there's a little bit of a rush to kind of to capture a lot of profit. Some of these municipalities are allowing for a lot of submissions to happen because they're getting non-refundable deposits, meaning, they might have accepted their limit, but in some cases they're allowing other people to go ahead and apply because it's more revenue coming in. Very tricky. I was disappointed to see that was happening, but happy that we could advise our clients against that particular municipality and move them over to something that made more sense for them. Again, when we're writing an application, we have almost a 95% success rate. We want to win. We want to win too. We're protective of our reputation in the industry. And as someone who got the very first recreational license in the world, we're very proud of that. And when we lead our clients through this process, we want to make sure they can win. So it's not just this, cookie cutter throw out type deal where we write an application for somebody and say, hey, pay us in full and we hope you win. We're active in making sure they're successful because we want them to open the store, the cultivation center, the processing center. We want them to get in business because we want to assist them later on. All right, so additional costs that are authorized. Late renewal fees is established. There's a 3% tax on each provisioning center. Remember, provisioning center is dispensary. Don't want that to be confusing. This is on gross receipts, very common. 3% isn't bad. We see up as high as 6%. And so the excise tax happens. Municipalities will put on their tax as well. Typically around, you can expect kind of a nationwide average around 15% total once everybody gets through taking their piece. And then there's actual costs of investigation and processing that exceed the application fee paid by the applicant. The intention of the state here is to try to say, look, we don't know what enforcement's going to look like. If we need to take extra fees because we're doing more investigations and things like that, they're just leaving themselves some room to increase the fees. That's pretty common. Another common worry is enforcement on the police. The police force thinks that when marijuana comes into their it's funny, into their community, that it's like it's going to be this rampant increase in crime, and it's a decrease in crime, which is I guess pretty typical for this industry. It's usually the opposite of what you think, and the knowledge about marijuana. But what we've been told since Prohibition it was enacted has just been backwards and wrong. And so this is an interesting situation where they just don't know. So the point is they're trying to cover themselves on this. All right, so list any restrictions on ownership, previous record, felonies, statewide, nationwide. So an applicant is ineligible to receive a license if the applicant holds an elective office of a governmental unit for the state of Michigan, another state, or a federal government, or is employed by a governmental unit of the state of Michigan. So you're going to have to give up your state job if you want to make millions of dollars selling cannabis. I think that's fair trade. I don't know what's going on at those state offices, but I've been through them a couple times. I get driver's license renewed every so often, and then registration for my car. I'm not terribly excited, and most of the time I'm sitting in those government offices, I'm like, oh man, I'm glad I'm not here. So hopefully we can pull some people out of the government and put them in the private sector, which would be great for them and their families. This does not apply to an elected officer or employee of a federally recognized Indian tribe or an elected precinct delegate. So no big deal, nothing out of the norm. Indian tribes have their own sovereignty. They're allowed to create their own regulations. Remember, we were the very first consultant to the very first vertically integrated tribe selling cannabis. Really an incredible opportunity on the reservation if they can get their act together and move quickly. All right, the applicant is ineligible if he or she has been convicted or released from incarceration for a felony under the laws of the state, any state within the past 10 years, convicted of a controlled substance felony. That's pretty standard across the country. Where we've seen this be different is in Oakland, California. They have a social equity program where they're trying to make amends for the drug war and who's been harmed most. Those are typically people of color, namely African American males who've been incarcerated at a much higher rate. Those numbers are available anytime you want to check those. So what they're trying to do in Oakland is basically allow and trying to put, for every license they grant, they want to grant another one for a convicted. If you're convicted, you have a felony for possession, right? So anyway, other than Oakland, California, this is pretty typical. All right, the applicant is ineligible if he or she has been convicted of a misdemeanor involving controlled substance, theft, dishonesty, or fraud. Okay. All right, so list any restrictions of ownership still. Each licensed entity remains distinct and separate within different working areas. Each licensed entity has separate entrances, exits, point-of-sale operations, record-keeping systems. That's okay. You can find this, guys, when you dig into the regulations, or you have someone do that for you. Not a big deal. All right, residency requirements, just a 2-year period immediately figured, not bad at all. Arkansas was a 7-year, and you had to prove 7 years of residency, so very cool that Michigan has kind of lightened that up. All right, zoning restrictions. Are we doing any questions on Facebook Live? Okay, good. Zoning restrictions for all types of licenses. So there's 1,000 radial feet from a drug-free zone, right, which includes arcades, child care centers, educational institutions, libraries, outdoor recreational facilities, schools, youth activity centers, and public housing. Now, this, I don't foresee problems in the state of Michigan. One of the things we're dealing with in the state of California is this always comes into play because things are happening so quickly in California. You'll identify a property, it'll be listed in the green zone, you'll go after it, you'll do negotiations, you're working through the landlords that want you, don't want you, maybe it's a sales process, you're getting all that ready to go, and then you'll find out there's changes, 600 feet away. There's so many businesses coming and going and so much boom happening in the state of California. It feels fluid. So what's happening this week will be different. And an example of this is like an after-school program. Maybe they're a yoga studio, and they're doing, they do an after-school study program or something where they're inviting kids in there. That's after hours and things like that, and it becomes, a sensitive use. So this in Michigan, we don't anticipate problems like that as long as you have a savvy real estate agent who knows cannabis, understands that. If you don't, reach out to a consultant that knows how to train those real estate agents or has them like we do that can deploy them in the state and just save you a lot of time. Nonetheless, I don't anticipate a green rush and the typical gouging of the real estate owners. I don't anticipate that in Michigan. In fact, I think Michigan's going to mirror more along the lines of West Virginia. In Ohio, where they are, you can go into certain areas where they invite you in, and will often pay the TI that's in an allowance for you, and even give you stipends for just developing areas that need development. So you can look for buildings that need that are sitting empty and things like that. Obviously, the economic turmoil that the state of Michigan's been through the last couple of decades, well documented, and so there are places of opportunity there. You also need to be 1,000 radial feet from another marijuana facility of any kind there. Also, you need to be 1,000 feet from controlled use, which is liquor stores. This also includes pool halls or billiards, right? So where they're serving alcohol. Interesting caveat there. So be mindful of that. All right, you also need to be 1,000 radial feet from a religious institution defined as exempt by the city assessor. Okay, religious institutions, pretty straightforward in the state of Michigan. In other states, there are a lot of different accepted, or a lot of companies that are filing for this tax status, right? They're applying as a religious institution. They may not look like one from the outside, might look like a big box store or something like that. But they are, or maybe kind of a new age type institution, but make sure they're not filing for religious status, protections, things like that. The application will allow for attachments, okay? I'll kind of talk a little bit about that, but this is very important. So when we write an application, applications vary across the country. They can be very simple and straightforward and have limitations. And we actually don't like that, because where we excel is writing the application and explaining in detail how you're going to operate your business and why you're going to do it better than your competitors. Allowing for attachments is a big deal because we can add on to different floor plans, and we can make that application look beautiful and really sell it, because it is a presentation to the regulators that it is conveying that you know what you're doing, but also they don't have any idea what marijuana is going to look like in their community. They're making it up in their head that it's going to look a certain way, and most of the time that's inaccurate. I can bet you they don't think it's going to look like an Apple store or be a beautiful finish out or this gorgeous dispensary that actually sets a trend and sets a standard for the community. They anticipate it to look something much seedier, if you will. So, all right. So, sales limits to patients and equivalency requirements. A registered qualifying patient or registered primary caregiver is not subject to criminal prosecution or sanctions for purchasing marijuana from a visiting center if the quality purchased is within the limits established under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. This is often subject of debate. People are asking, when you're like, okay, if I can have 2.5 ounces, I don't think they'll go back and forth, and someone invariably will start talking about what someone can possibly consume in a day. Caregivers are distributing and doing different things, so this is good. This is pretty typical for them to talk about this. In this situation, a registered primary caregiver is not subject to criminal prosecution or sanctions for any transfer of less than 2.5 ounces. So you want to make sure that you're staying in compliance with that. All right, so the costs associated with doctors registering and requirements to provide medical cards. You might ask, why is this in here? I'm not a doctor, I'm not concerned with it. You will be dealing with this. Doctors are your advocates, they're your voice on the street right now. They're going to help facilitate this. And I always look for specific economic indicators, and when there are restrictions on doctors, that is a huge red flag for me, and I want to make sure that our clients are prepared for that and they understand that. And when you're putting together pro formas and financial projections, and you're just making all these assumptions that it's going to be easy, or that the doctors are going to have an easy time writing a prescription, a diagnosis. If you're wrong about that, your numbers are going to be wrong from the very beginning, and that investor is going to get a number and a return on investment that's just inaccurate, and they can come in, depending on how the contracts are written with these investors, they're very smart, they've done this, they've invested before, they can take your business. So you want to make sure this is right. Patients need a signed physician statement from a physician currently licensed to practice medicine in the state of Michigan. Patients are required to register with the medical marijuana program. Registration is mandatory. No big deal there. All right, the cost of patients to register for medical card. I love this. The patient registry application fee is $60. That is cheap. That is for new and renewal applications. So very, very cool there. Glad they didn't kick that up to $400 or something like that. All right, types of licenses and cost of each for cultivation, processing, and retail. Provisioning center, retail, provisioning center, dispensary, all the same. All right, grower A licenses are capped by statute at $10,000. Grower B, C, processor, transport, and provisioning center licenses will be dependent on the number of total licenses subject to assessment. It could be as low as $10,000, as high as $57,000. Vertical integration requirement and options. Very important. When you're looking at the business model, how are you going to make money? Does this make sense? When you're talking to an investor and asking them to participate with you, we are vertically integrated in the state of California. That's why one of the reasons why we're so successful and we went from 0 to 9 stores so quickly. Vertical integration, and to simplify it for you guys, vertical integration on the production side, when you're growing, you can write off the cost of that production generally, okay? It has a feel and look of a normal business, if you will. On the retail side, provisioning centers, you're subject to basically not writing off very much. It's a safe bet. If you wanted to make an assumption or generalization, you don't write off very much. You have a cost of goods, and what happens is you end up paying about a 60% tax rate. Whereas, if you're presenting that to an investor, that they're going to get that, they're going to capture that, and all of a sudden that's going to Uncle Sam, and locally and state, you'll be off there. So vertical integration requirements, we're always interested in this because we want to advise clients on how to make money in this business and how to be sustainable. And vertical integration requirements, we're always interested in this because we want to advise clients on how to make money in this business and how to be sustainable. And vertical integration is something we love, and we always want to preach that. It's not always possible. Some people come to us and say, look, I just want to get in this business. What's the path of least resistance? And I say, look, go with a retail center. We can get you in there for a couple $100,000. That's a way. If you're going to build your own cultivation center, depending how big it is, it can start around $500,000 and quickly get as high as $10 million, $13, $20 million, depending on what you're doing. Oakland recently and had a chance to listen to Aurora Cannabis. These guys are in Canada, just a smart group. They spent $100 million on their cultivation center. That's 800,000 square feet. It looks like it's right there off the airport when you land, and it looks like the Cowboy Stadium basically in Arlington. It's huge. So anyway, you can see where you can get carried away with that depending on what you want to do. Bottom line is, are you going to spend millions? Are you going to get in for a couple $100,000? Very important. Okay, so Michigan's medical cannabis business will be allowed to grow, process, and sell medical marijuana at the same location once a new statewide medical marijuana regulatory system is up and running. Potential medical cannabis licensees, who want to run vertically integrated businesses under one roof must have separate working areas, entrances, record-keeping systems in place for each license. We have done this from the ground up. We understand this. This can get you in a lot of trouble if it's not done correctly. You want to effectively think about it as operating businesses, different businesses under the same roof. When recreational comes in Michigan, you will operate those two as two different businesses. Just because, depending on how the program rolls out, you're most likely not going to scrape your medical program for your recreational license. You'll just add the recreational license to it. When you do that, you're still going to have two different programs, different price points, taxing, all those things. So you're going to probably benefit from both. Probably. It'll depend how it rolls out. That is what happened in Colorado. It took about 3 years for the medical program and the recreational program to balance out. Meaning, when rec happened, medical was still a huge advantage. Tax advantages, different pricing, higher potency. You're able to purchase more. Just a lot of things happen. And then after about year 3, it became to where people who were getting their medicine with their medical card were finding products that were the equivalent, right? So it takes time, about 3 years for it to run. But even still, today, as we have medical and recreational dispensaries in the same location, those are handled on 2 separate books. All right, so all information available on marijuana-infused product centers. So establish restrictions on edible marijuana-infused products to prohibit shapes that would appeal to minors. This is very common. We actually had, this has been ongoing in Colorado. It was a concern in the very beginning. To be fair to the Marijuana Enforcement Division here, their goal is to try to protect kids. It's not... there's nothing unusual about that or anything that people should be critical about. However, so we'll just take the experience that we have in Colorado. They're learning from that, and they're saying, look, don't make these shapes. Don't make gummies look like gummies and things like that. So you'll see a development of products. If you get a chance to come to Colorado, visit some of our dispensaries or other people's, you'll see so many different products that are, the options there. So not a big deal, just pretty straightforward. Marijuana-infused product means a topical formulation, a tincture, beverage, edible substance, or similar product containing any usable marijuana that is intended for human consumption in a manner other than smoke and inhalation. Marijuana-infused products shall not be considered a food for purposes of the food law, and it gives you that statute and why that is there. I understand they're not considering that. We have always been on the forefront and a leader in the state of Colorado and being mindful and understanding what agencies are eventually going to regulate us and back down on that, meaning OSHA, food preparation, kitchen requirements, FDA requirements. You want to, by now in Colorado, you're not doing very well if you're not already following all those rules. And being having the foresight there. In Michigan, it's telling you don't have to. It's not considered food. So But I would. We're not ever going to allow any of our clients to kind of shirk that and start that, because that's going to end up in retrofitting and a lot of different things when it does become legal federally. It's going to be costly. So we're going to prepare for that. All right, geographic zones for cultivation, processing, and retail. A paper copy or electronic posting website reference for the ordinance or zoning restriction that the municipality adopted to authorize or restrict operation of one or more marijuana facilities in the municipality. All right, next up is permissible use. Medical, we talked about 2 1/2 ounces. No more than 12 marijuana plants kept in an enclosed locked facility or outdoor plants must not be visible to the unaided eye for an adjacent property when viewed by an individual at ground level, blah, blah, blah. It must be grown within a stationary structure that is enclosed on all sides. So, no growing out on your back porch and things like that. You can hold it in by chain link fences, wooden slats, or a similar material that prevents access by general public. Outdoor grows aren't going to be as common in Michigan as they are in other parts of the country for obvious reasons, climate and others. So don't see this as information. It's really speaking to personal production there. Qualifying conditions list. This is also another economic indicator that I love to see. I like to look at what the doctors are doing. I like to look at the qualifying conditions and sort of try to advise our clients on why this is an exciting market or why it's not. The things I love on here, obviously cancer, glaucoma, positive status for human HIV, and AIDS, hepatitis C, some lateral sclerosis. Crohn's disease is another one, really, really wonderful. A lot of people around the world are treating Crohn's disease with marijuana and successfully. They have an agitation of Alzheimer's disease. I love that too because I've seen some videos on YouTube where people have Alzheimer's. They have seizures. They're having difficulty and they medicate themselves and then they're really relaxed and there's a lot of great work that's being done by people. Obviously, we don't have clinical trials yet, which I'm most excited about the clinical trials and the progress of breaking this plant down and seeing what its possibilities are because some people believe that it's limitless. And so as far as Alzheimer's and neuropathy and treating different brain ailments, really a lot of progress there. So I love to see that they're already talking about Alzheimer's, which is great. So good. What I would love to see is chronic pain. I'd love to see a bigger list. I'd love to see that. But keep in mind, this doesn't necessarily kill the deal. We didn't have PTSD in Colorado until about a year ago. So that's crazy, right? I mean, PTSD is one of the most common things that you'll have. PTSD, chronic pain. Those are very straightforward. It's hard to diagnose PTSD. You're seeing it being diagnosed not just for our people who serve in the armed forces, who actually have PTSD, shell shock, and the like. PTSD is being sort of they're casting a broad net and letting people who have had a different trauma in their life qualify for PTSD, which all that means is that a doctor can write you a prescription for that, and there's less resistance to you getting your medicine. All right, so you can begin applying for licenses on December 15th, 2017 for grower, processor, transporter, provisioning center, and safety compliance center. All right, expectations will mirror other states as far as setbacks. We talked a little bit about that, but as recreational regulations are not yet finalized, there will be different rules and regulatory changes to be aware of to the closing date. So what you can expect typically is 1,500 to 3,000 feet for cultivation centers, 600 to 1,000 feet for sensitive uses there. All right, testing requirements, summary, contamination, pesticides, potency, things like that. All right, Section 206 of the MMFLA requires that rules be promulgated to establish testing standards, procedures, and requirements for marijuana sold through provisioning centers. In addition, Section 504 of the MMFLA allows provisioning centers to sell marijuana only after it's been tested. Remember, testing is going to happen at the safety compliance facility. Safety compliance facility is typically a distribution, right? But anyway, or it can be just called a testing center, but that's where it's going to happen. All right, the department is currently working on rules related to testing requirements and information is forthcoming. So there are fortunately a lot of good models and examples of other states, so they're hopefully pulling that information, find out what worked and didn't work. You can, cases and studies in Oregon and Washington with testing are well documented, and so hopefully Michigan aims to avoid some of those mistakes and learn from them, frankly. So the Bureau intends to require testing of marijuana and marijuana-infused products at the following 2 points in the supply chain. The first place you're going to test it is after harvest. Harvested marijuana must pass required test before it is transferred from a grower to a processor or to a provisioning center. This is very important. We have a client in Massachusetts that we're advising on a pretty significant extraction facility. And a lot of their questions are, I've had to shift that conversation into we want to begin with the end in mind. What products do you want to sell? And then their question to me is, what products are available? What products are in demand? And I thought, it's a beautiful question. I love that. So we provide those financials for them, all that information, and we tell them, look, these are the products that are selling. Here's what we foresee happening. And we give them real trends and our actual data that we've gotten here in Colorado and how a market matures. But one of the things that they were having difficulty understanding is, they were focused on the extraction process, not so much the purity of the product going in, right? Garbage in, garbage out sort of thing. It doesn't matter how great your extraction is or what method you're using if the product that you're purchasing is tainted. Also, there was a little bit of confusion on when parts per billion becomes parts per million quickly as it's extracted and challenges you have there, i.e. it can pass a test before it's extracted, and then afterwards, after it becomes a concentrate, your parts per billion became something that's unacceptable. So just knowing that, testing at multiple levels along the way is normal. There are still states that resist this. I don't recommend that you do that. There are two reasons for that. Number one, I think customers are getting smarter every single day. This industry is changing week on week on week. I mean, it's so eventually I think customers and users are going to be asking for specific, you're going to ask about pesticides and things like that, heavy metals and what's happening and what they're smoking. So you want to make sure that and they're going to know, all right, we understand before processing, after processing, where's it at? And so that can hurt your business if they're finding out the percentages aren't in line with what they're learning out there. So the second reason is because you're simply going to be out of compliance, and you want to be able to have that trail that you understand where that came from. Because and I was also laying this out for our client in Massachusetts, saying, listen, you're going to have multiple products. If we have a CO2 run that comes through and doesn't look like we want it to look, great. We can slide that over to a topical, and we can diversify our product set, which we're going to be doing anyway. But the point is, we're not going to just waste a run, And so we're letting them know there's different steps along the way, and the testing of it needs to happen in certain ways. And the consumer who's going to be asking for strain-specific topicals and things like that, we need to be able to target that and source that back to cultivators, right? And so one cultivator might be great for something, but then they might be testing hot on a couple of things along the way, but different strains are working. So you're going to have a lot of different vendors you're working with on the cultivation side, but testing is going to be done at different levels, and it can all be different. You're going to need to manage that entire process. All right. After processing, so remember we have tested before, as after the harvest of marijuana must pass required tests. Then after processing, marijuana and marijuana-infused products in their final state must pass required tests before they are transferred from a processor to a provisioning center. Pretty straightforward stuff. Facilities may choose to test their product at additional points in the supply chain. This is interesting. This is going to be a financial decision for you. Remember, government regulation and regulation of any kind, the end user, the customer pays for it, not the business. It doesn't work that way. It never works that way. Pick your favorite product. If the cost of it spiked, you're going to be paying that price. The business isn't going to absorb that. You're going to have to balance between the fact that you're conveying and marketing to your customers, look, we've tested it X amount of times. Well, if testing is a debacle and it's not well run and it's very, very expensive, or the way they're regulating a batch and what they're considering requirements, if it's onerous for you and expensive, you're going to do less of it. So this is interesting. We don't want to commit to how much testing is going to be done. We know we want to lead the industry in that, but there's a lot that remains to be seen on how that supply chain is going to work before we're going to commit to doing additional testing. All right, so how is the application going to be scored and what percentage? Okay, great question. An example of this is like 100 points, but 50 goes towards business experience or your value as an operating partner, that sort of thing. 25 points might go to diversity, etc. So right now, the department and the board are working diligently to establish a review process. Applications and information will be forthcoming. All right, so I will tell you this. It will be a merit-based application. And your business acumen, the trends across the country, who you are as a business person and what successes you've had is very important. The second most important thing is going to be who's going to operate, right? And our success as consultants is because we're listing ourselves as an operator on your application. So we're taking that completely away. I mean, we talked about the board of regulators, and they have zero experience in cannabis. Well, I'll tell you this: the face of cannabis isn't who you think. It is people that oftentimes don't even partake in recreationally or medicinally. Okay, so they're in this for the business side of it, and so they have a tremendous amount of business experience, but they don't have marijuana experience as a consumer or as a producer, and so they're aligning themselves. We get calls all the time that people want to align themselves with us as an operator, and we think that makes perfect sense because the regulators are going to go, all right, business acumen here, operator here, and then a couple of other categories where they're going to score this. So really kind of taking care of business that way. It's only human nature for them to look at this and go, man, you were really, really good at the pharmaceutical industry, but that doesn't translate to you being able to grow cannabis in our community the right way. So it makes sense that they would be strict on that. All right. Next one, is there a state-issued software like Metric? We have Metric in the state of Colorado. Metric is in a lot of states across the country. So it is their state-issued software for compliance. You're going to need an API, and you're going to need a point-of-sale system and other things. Please don't confuse this with software that you're using internally in your business. This is set up to complement the state, get the information they need. It is not set up to help you run your business. Totally different. Metric is METRC, that metric system. Franwell, if you will, you might have heard that. It was chosen as Michigan's statewide monitoring system for integrated marijuana tracking, inventory, and verification under the Marijuana Tracking Act of 2016. You might have heard of BioTrack and a couple other people. So what happens typically is they're vying to get that big contract with the state. Metric's great. We use them here. Nobody's just enamored with them, but as far as what we're doing in a brand new industry, they're fine for now. I do want to reference something here on Metric that was important, and that is page 1 with Laura. What was it? Just hold for 1 second, please. Okay, so statewide monitoring system. So this is how tags are produced. Okay, so tags are produced for seed to sale tracking, right? So there are two types of tags in Metric. There's a seed to sale tracking system, plant tags, and their package tags. Okay, in order for new tags is placed in Metric by the licensee. Metric will then ship the tags to the physical location of the facility. Licensees do not need any specialized equipment as the tags are produced by Metric and shipped. Further information on the tag ordering process will be presented during the road shows in the department in November. So that is coming right up. The question is, am I responsible for costs associated with the ordering tags? This is where the beautiful part comes in. The state of Michigan will cover the cost of new tags. Good for you, state of Michigan. Licensees will be responsible for paying the shipping and handling costs. If a tag's been damaged and needs to be replaced, the licensee will be responsible for the cost of replacement tags. So it goes on to, there's a lot of other stuff on there on transfer, but I feel like this is the most important part. They're going to be paying for that. As typical per government agencies, sometimes they're off in their budget and projections, and they can have the intention of paying for this in the beginning, and then roll out and decide, hey man, there's so many more tags than we anticipated. The expense, the maintenance, the management of it, too expensive, and they could ask you to participate. But great to know that they're starting out in the very beginning, and one less thing you need to pay for. All right, so important deadlines for the program that speak, and one less thing you need to pay for. All right, so important deadlines for the program that speak towards being operational. If a license renewal application is not submitted by the license expiration date, the license may be renewed within 60 days after its expiration date upon application, payment of the regulatory assessment under Section 603, and satisfaction of any renewal requirements and late fees set forth in the rules. The licensee may continue to operate during the 60 days after the license expiration if the license is renewed by the end of the 60-day period. You might think, why would I let my license expire? Well, because you're doing a million other things. and you're trying to run a business on your own that needs, a lot of employees, a lot of help, and a lot of experience. And so if you're going about this on your own, that can happen. I will tell you this, in Denver, if you let your license expire, you're not getting it back. Because there's a moratorium in Denver right now. Which my point to this is there's municipalities will have their own rules, and they're going to set that out, so they can issue a moratorium there. They can have it be a free for all at first, like we had in Denver, and then okay, that's enough, and then cut it off there. So if you let something expire in the state in Denver, then you do not get renewed there. So I say that because we're a mature market, and people are looking at the state of Colorado and what we've done well. We have a capitalistic model here. It wasn't very expensive to get in originally. We have 1,800 cultivation centers here. That is a lot for a small market, a small state comparably. So that they can do this. Individual cities can opt out, and they can forbid medical marijuana within the city limits. All right, so next question. Do you recommend any areas that might be underserved, economically disadvantaged, or that the state would give preference to an applicant here? The answer to that question is complex. The answer is yes, absolutely. In the state of Michigan, there are areas that are underserved, economically oppressed, disadvantaged. You need to be paying attention to that. You need to be talking to real estate agents who are familiar with those areas, or hiring a consultant that has a real estate team that can go in there and do that. There are two parts to this. Yes, it is absolutely true that you can get subsidies from the government. You can get all kinds of great bells and whistles and just incentives to do business there. But you need to make sure that community is viable, right? You're selling a product that can be an average spend of $4,000 a year for a customer, right? So can that customer in that place that you're building your facility, spending all that money, can they buy there? That's very, very important. So paying attention to demographics is good, but overall, I think it's a phenomenal strategy to target disadvantaged areas, especially if you're a processing center. Processing and cultivation, you're hiding your facilities. This isn't a place where you're having foot traffic from the general public every day. You can have these facilities as long as the municipality approves of it and it's okay and it's been zoned correctly and a lot of other boxes are checked. You can have it way off the beaten path, which means less expensive real estate. So very, very cool there. Take advantage of that. We've seen that work for several of our clients, and we've seen it backfire on a couple clients, and we can dive into that further if you guys have questions. All right, so elements of the application package here. First and foremost, you need a business plan. Our business plans are 25 pages. They're robust. They're not a copy and paste type deal. They are impressive. They are designed for people who have never heard of cannabis, don't know anything about the business side of cannabis, and we're introducing them along the way, giving them a nationwide snapshot, statewide snapshot, municipality snapshot, and then that actual opportunity in that building and what that means. Our investors love that. Clients that hire us to do this love it. We've helped people raise north of $13 million doing it. The business plan, unless there's a mistake made when the application is released and the business plan is limiting you to pages, then this needs to be a big deal. This business plan, a lot of people take the business plans we develop with them and they just convert it into operations and they go a long way with it. So business plan is a part of the application package. Operations plan is very, very important. You need to operate with the end in mind, and it needs to make sense. I'm not going to tell you that the people reading this are cannabis experts. So if you're off a little bit, say you're recommending an extraction process that doesn't jive with the end product, or that's not the most efficient way to do it, most likely they're not going to catch that. But you're going to suffer later on the operations side if you just miss on these things. But regulators are getting smarter. They're learning. I mean, they're bringing in consultants from other states. We have people reach out to us and say, wow, you got the very first recreational license in the world. You've been in business since 2009. Come in and advise us. And we're like, absolutely, we'll help you write this. We love to participate in that. We don't do it, charge an arm and a leg for that because we're helping the industry. I mean, finally, they're starting to ask experts in the business how to do this. But my point to that is, what if they do know? What if they do know your operations, and what if your application is disqualified because you're simply throwing a lot of information out there, hoping to get the application, win the application, and then you'll kind of sort out the operations later on. I totally get that, but if your operations plan is off, you might be disqualified. Quality assurance plan. Goes without saying, there's so many different narratives that go involved with that. Security plan in itself, I've done security plan webinars that are over an hour long. Please check our YouTube channel for that. There's so much great information in that. I've actually done a webinar on how to write a security and surveillance plan. And there's some really, really good stuff in there. There's some great companies that you can reach out to. The main thing I want to say about security plan is make sure that you're balancing the customer experience with security, right? And you get what you pay for that. You need an outside security plan, outside security company managing that. You can't have Uncle Jim, who was in the Special Forces, just kind of hanging out on the couch with an AR-15. So there's got to be more to it. It's important. All right, financial plan goes without saying. This needs to make sense. Most of the time, the municipality is wanting to know what their participation level is, right? What are they going to get? So you want to make sure these financial plans are there. We're competing in an area in California where they were saying they're going to give $4 million a year to the city. That business is not going to make $4 million a year, so they're going to be in the red. I'm not sure what the agreement was and how that came about. That plan has since been disqualified, and that person has been removed from that municipality. But we saw that, and it was confusing to us because it didn't make a lot of sense. So make sure that your numbers make sense in the eyes of your investor. Make sure it's something you can prove. All right, moving right along. So licensing. So how many licenses does the MMFLA allow? This is very important. I always want to know this. Local municipalities are going to limit this. Okay, we want to know that. One of the things we do very, very well is we can look at a program and tell you what's right with it and what's wrong with it. And we can also say, look, based on what we know, our lobbying efforts on the ground there, this municipality is going to open up next, and here's why we like it. So even though you want to be over here, you're adjacent to it, very close based on where you live or what your target demographic is. This will make sense. So local municipalities that limit, we want to kind of avoid that. If we don't feel like that's really going to serve the area, the market. We also are in this industry every day, and we have a lot of friends in this industry, and we know who's doing what most of the time. And if we know a big player's going in there, and we know how they kind of can dominate a market, maybe we'll, for a client that may not be as strong as these nationwide brands that are going around, we will recommend a place for them. Because remember, the name of the game in writing applications is to win. That's all that matters. If you don't win, you don't have a business. All right, it is notable that the department and board cannot limit the number allowed, which is great. All right, so the review process. You have step one. They're going to do the review. You're going to submit your application into there. The bare minimums there, you need to have a property secured. There are guidelines for transfer, guys. I get a little bit nervous when a client's asking me about transferring a license and moving a location. I think, why? Why not just, you're telling the states you're going to operate in this facility. We're putting our name on it. Why don't you just stay here? I'll dig in further and say, what's prompting you to move? And that might be because they own other properties or they're working on getting something rezoned. I mean, there's usually a good reason for it, and it's not necessarily an intense conversation, but it's something where we'll push back initially because we just don't want to do that. Having said that, there are guidelines for transfer. Usually these timelines don't really match up to what people think they're going to. Maybe construction will take longer. Maybe hearing back if they've won will take longer. Raising capital, sometimes in the rare instance, it'll take longer. Once you have the application, capital tends to kind of find you, if you will, because it is an asset. If you don't win the license, capital doesn't really care, not interested in you at all. So, but guidelines for transfer can happen. But the most important part in step one of the review process is having that property secured. All right, so diving in further to the business plan here. You need experience in business. You're going to highlight that. This is more... we dive in on the application side of this and making sure that everybody mirrors something. Our technical writers on staff are exceptional, and they have won in states like Maryland by using a veterinarian in place of a pharmacist. That is something that's great that it worked out. but that's not something we necessarily want to follow. Actually, veterinarians are pretty impressive when you start to dig into their background. I learned this recently. They're phenomenal. They actually are giving medicine to different types of animals. They got a horse comes in at one time, and then a cockatoo comes in, and they're treating them both, giving surgery and medicine and all those things. So a veterinarian, in my opinion, and my assessment is that they're well more qualified, and certainly could give advice on cannabis with some research and things available. But most of the time on the experience of business, we're filling out your board for you and making sure that it's strong enough and it's appropriate to what they're asking for. Next up is the operation plan. You have 2 steps to that, and then quality assurance and security. Financial plan, please check if you're interested in these financial plans. I actually have in my email, it's a webinar, it's an hour and a half long. It's called One Document to Get an Investor to Say Yes. And it goes through how you can prove these numbers and do that. If you want that, I'll email it to you. You're welcome to sit on that, and hopefully you'll be able to pull some information from that and fill out your financial plan. On our YouTube channel, there's just a lot of stuff that talks about financial plan, raising money, and investment in a couple of different ways. So really good stuff to help you fill out your financial plan. All right, further into the executive summary, when you're filling this out, you got your background, what you aim to do, your purpose, you have analysis and proposed business model, approach taken, whose experience you're relying on. You have an assessment summary. This is where you're going to talk about funding, distribution of profits, total capital investment needed, predicted cash flow, and tax revenues. Don't try to do this on your own. Reach out to somebody and ask them to do it. Sit in on our webinars and learn and learn a little bit about that and kind of know what you don't know, and then get an idea of what it's going to take to pay a professional to put that together for you. It's very important. This is the stuff that generally everyone can understand and read, and it's impressive to regulators. And the next step in the executive summary is just making recommendations on multiple phases. We're just talking at this point on how we're going to build this out, right? You might have a 100,000 square foot vision. We might have a building that's allowed for that, but the program doesn't support it, and the demand that's there, and the business model doesn't support it. So we're going to build out 30,000 square feet first, and then sort of build it along the way with revenues from the business. So you're just talking about that, and you're preparing the state for this is what we're going to do, and you want to get approval for that. All right, next steps, you're going to convey deadlines, informing the state and local regulatory bodies of intent to purchase, right? At this point, you're saying if you're purchasing the real estate, which we hope that you are, we hope that your investor is or someone's doing that so we can control that. If not, you're going to inform them of significant progress of a letter of intent, a lease that you have signed, and how that's going to progress. You also want to include an industry overview here, another landmark year for cannabis, all those things. Talk about the 29 states allowing medical cannabis and the ones that are recreational. You're doing an industry overview. Basics here, you at this point, you have set up your entity. You have your personal addresses, business addresses you're including in the application. You have entity ID numbers, company logos, trademarks, identifying markers, location references to identity where the proposed facility will be located. Then you have references to your involvement in the Michigan marijuana legalization efforts. You want to talk about your involvement there, your philanthropy, your community outreach, all those things that you've already been doing or someone on your team has been doing. You want to highlight those. Then you want to talk about state and local jurisdiction factors. So you're going to be given a provisional license. This is issuance of a cultivation license that does not permit the licensee to cultivate marijuana until the licensee passes pre-operational inspection. Pretty straightforward stuff. You're just at this point in the application outlining how this process is going to go, and you're amenable to that. Program regulation, you'll just identify and address the state regulatory body. We've covered that. You mentioned permissible use and permissible products, what you're going to sell and why you're going to sell it. I love BDS analytics. If you need some just general information, what BDS analytics, they're a data company, they're great. And Roy Bingham over there is awesome, just a great person to deal with in general. You can get some data for them for probably a couple $1,000s or so. It's retail data on what's selling and why it's selling. You could add this at that point in there, or you could call us and we could give you that, advise you on that application process. If we're writing the application process for you, we throw that in and we don't charge you for it. All right, and you talk about edibles and extracts and then the current sales limits, and you're just talking about the financial limitations here and what's good and what the problem is. In this case, if there's a 14-day waiting period, maximum allowable quantity, you want to make sure that you're doing that and you're not projecting that your clients are going to, customers are going to buy daily and things like that if they have limits there. Territories is important. You're going to talk about an overview of how the territories are set up, county, district, city, and population. And then the window of opportunity. So when applications are available, we've established that. We're going to do that. December 15th is when they're going to start accepting those. You want to be the first one to submit your application. That's the most important thing. We succeed because we're often one of the first people to put it in there. The way we write our applications is simply second to none. And when we turn it in, it sets the tone. They know, wow, this is a professional application, and then they can start to dismiss other applications. And that's competition, guys. That's just the reality of the situation. I wish we could move past application point. It is a thing. It will be a thing for the coming years, and that's why we excel at it. And that's why we put so much emphasis on it, and that's why we create so much free content to try to prepare you to do it. The big guys and the big institutional investors, they don't need this kind of help. You do as someone that we're trying to help, a small business owner, get into this industry while you still can and while this window is available. All right, you want to talk about what other factors play into the window of opportunity. You want to assess the local market, what's possible. I see this is a mistake I see in the beginning of a lot of business plans. They're miscalculating the possibility of the population that's going to consume cannabis. This is very different in Michigan than it would be in the state of Arkansas. You need to understand the culture and what's it going to take to get people to go into a doctor and get a medical marijuana card. And you understand what numbers are appropriate. Do not put numbers that 20% of the population is going to go in and get a medical card. That's simply not true. You will see a fraction of that go in there. And if you're off and you're wrong on that number, now you're going to be wrong on every number all the way through. And most importantly, is the cash that you're giving back to your investor, and if the municipality is participating, the amount of capital that they're going to get. You might find as you're starting to get in these sophisticated applications and talking to local municipalities that they're interested, you're competing on how much you're going to give them, right? So you have to make sure that it makes business sense. And that example I gave you earlier, the $4 million they were committing, we knew they couldn't do it. It took a while for the city to realize that they couldn't do it. But that didn't really do anybody a favor. I feel like it wasted the city's time, and then that company didn't, they didn't win either. So. All right, so application overview, we talked about it's going to be basis of awards on points, non-resident ownership, what that looks like. Ownership is defined differently. I could do a webinar on ownership and investment structure and publicly traded companies and private placements and all kinds of things that get so tricky. Some of these are pretty cut and dry, and they don't allow certain types of ownership, period, but others are a little bit more complicated. So you want to make sure that you know that you understand the backgrounds of everyone on your team, and that makes sense for you. We understand the license duration and renewal. We understand what taxes at the state and local level as it relates to wholesale and retail. You also want to address political factors here. It's a harsh reality. Be aware of it and get involved. Community outreach is very important. Just as a general rule, do more than you think you should. There's an outstanding group here in Colorado. They're called the Green Team, and it started out as a couple of people. They had the big marijuana festival when marijuana became recreational legal here in Denver, and it was just big. Everyone just descended on downtown Denver and smoked a lot of marijuana, and the result of that is a lot of irresponsible behavior and trash. And so a couple of cannabis entrepreneurs and smart people who were beneficiaries of this legalization, they got together and put on some green shirts, called themselves the Green Team, and were just running around picking up trash. And from there, it developed into a full-blown nonprofit organization that does far more than that. So that's important. We at STRAINWISE Consulting have Consume Intelligently, which is a consumer-based website that teaches people how to consume and the dangers of marijuana, and so that's very, very important. States have reached out to us and asked us to use that. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and there's a lot of great community outreach. So there are so many ways that you can do it. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and there's a lot of great community outreach. So there are so many ways that you can do it. So anyway, be mindful of that. Community outreach is important. You also, just a quick note on that, you need to ask the questions to the cities and the communities what they need. Don't make the assumption, and this happens in Colorado as well, that schools are number one, that they need marijuana money, but number two, that they're even they're gonna accept marijuana money. And so you can't just be like, all right, we're gonna give X amount of dollars to the school. Well, that might not be important. Maybe the police chief hasn't had a raise in 10 years. Maybe there's issues with the fire department. There's always tension among government agencies because they're government agencies, right? They're typically, they're not run like private institutions, right? So they're usually short on cash. And so you want to make sure that you're plugged in there. I would love to have you plugged into something that really matters. We do this really, really well. We can submit an application and have it contributing to the certain businesses and certain agencies that matter, and that's very, very important. So I can guarantee this, if you go, I can't really guarantee it, but I can say this, if you go into a municipality and you're addressing pain points with capital revenue, that's very good. They're going to like you. All right, market size, you want to talk about that, the medical cannabis market overall, potential customer base, we talked about that. Potential demand, tourism, not a big deal in Michigan. Consider the source of resident to patient ratios, where you're pulling your data, who can possibly, you can't understand what, just think about how you consume, right? You don't drive 50 miles for a haircut, right? You drive 3 or 4 or 10 miles for a haircut. And sometimes in like states like California, 10 miles takes you an hour and a half to get 10 miles. So you need to make sure that you're not counting as your customer base someone that's absolutely not going to consume your product. And please, I know some of you guys are phenomenal cultivators, and you probably grow the best weed. Everybody in the world grows the best weed. Per their own experience, but it doesn't mean it's going to translate into sales and different things. So just be mindful of that. Make sure that you're not just pulling numbers out. All right, you need to do an analysis after that. Just the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. We do this as a part of the application process. We do it for every step of the way. We do it for you personally. We do it for your team. We do it for the state. We do it for the local municipalities. We do it all along the way. And we do it specifically down to that building on what's needed and what weaknesses they have and what threats there are. I can tell you one of the big overriding threats. Obviously, you have prohibition. We are in a time of prohibition. It may not feel like that at times. It does for us. It pretty much feels like that every day. We're aware it's fairly illegal, and we're reminded of that through just day-to-day business stress and how transactions like paying bills are handled. So. All right, financial analysis, we talked about that. Don't want to put you to sleep, but you need cash flow, you need grow and retail, you need cumulative cash flow, combined cumulative cash flow, cumulative discounted cash flow projections. All right, then we have recommendation and next steps. This is really typical of how that construction process is going to work, what's going to happen next, and how long that's going to take. You want to get that right. Most states are going to lay out an outline, so they're going to say, all right, operational timetable for this is going to be 6 months. Well, if you're building from the ground up new construction like we're proposing to do in the state of Florida, that's going to take a lot longer than 6 months. That facility is going to be state of the art and gorgeous. It's going to take a lot of work, 6 months. So you want to be mindful that either that deadline isn't concrete or there's a way through it, but you're addressing along the way. And at this point, we want to be upfront in the application process of what's happening. And we also want to talk about indications on why you're likely to get your license here. Are we making a better business case than someone else? Do we have a strategic advantage? Do you have an operator like STRAINWISE Consulting using that? What's happening to make it attractive? All right, operational recommendation is what's up next. Absentee owner, how that's going to work. Are you on a 2-year, 5-year contract with your vendors? Who's operating? What's happening there? Expected outcomes. All right, so I'm going to finish up here, guys. We're out of time. I'm going to talk about remaining narratives. Please get out a pen and write these down. So remaining narratives that they're going to shape every single application that you write or some form of, okay? The first one is a diversity plan. You want to have that written out. You want to have an operational timetable. You want to have employee qualifications, duties, responsibilities, roles. You want to have security and surveillance plan. You have a transportation plan. You want to have a medical marijuana storage plan. This medical marijuana storage plan is one of the most overlooked things that I see. Labeling plan, who's responsible for it, how it works, and how to remain compliant, very important. Inventory management plan, waste management plan, diversion prevention plan, pesticide plan, cultivation plan, nutrient plan, processing extraction plan, maintaining a sanitary facility plan, record keeping plan, business history and capacity to operate, capital requirements and build out plan, and then we talked about community impact plan. Some variation or every variation of this will be a part of every single application that you do. All right, and the next steps there are securing the real estate. You want to talk about the current vacancy rates and does the property meet the needs of the opportunity? Can the property be leased or purchased? Does it meet all the setback requirements, all that stuff? And then as far as license acquisition, you want to know the deadlines and the time frame to repair. You want to has your consultant had success? So when you're vetting a consultant or someone to write an application, the first question is, where have you won? Have you written merit-based applications in competitive states? So that's important. And then at that point, you want to engage a consultant to write that, not just an attorney that's simply collecting a lot of application fees. That's their business model. They're here to kind of scoop in, make a lot of money on the application writing process, but they don't have a vested interest in your success down the road. So at this point, if there's no one else out there that can answer these questions for you of how many applications have they won and where have they won in competitive states, at this point you'll engage STRAINWISE Consulting or one of just a few other consultants that have a track record like us. Remember, nothing I've shared with you today is theory. We've used every single one of these business strategies to create a successful multi-million-dollar business. We believe you can too. Our product set at STRAINWISE Consulting, very well publicized. Here, for those of you who can see this, everything from state regulations, inventory audits, all the way down to interactions with government agencies, marketing, branding, and social media. Pretty straightforward stuff. Going forward, we do not, do we have anything pressing on Facebook Live? Okay, no worries guys. I don't have a lot of time to answer on the webinar questions. I do want to leave my contact information here. And I want to thank all of you guys for joining us on Facebook Live. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email, subanks@strainwise.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Please do go to our YouTube channel. There's so much good content there. There are a lot of comments coming in. People are joining that weekly. I appreciate all the kind words, and we're very happy to provide this for you. But the intention of that YouTube channel, this webinar will be on that YouTube channel. The slides, I can email you directly. So email me if you need those, but this will be on that YouTube channel, and hopefully this and the other content you see on the page is really, really helping you get a step closer to getting in this business. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.